Hi, I'm Bill Henry, and I'm here with Andy, owner of Tax 29 Tax Service. Andy, tell us about Tax 29.
Tax 29 has been serving the Valley for over 12 years, offering professional tax preparation at affordable prices. Last year, we prepared over 15,000 tax returns with an average cost of under $60. And this year, we're opening a new Tax 29 office in Salem.
Well, it sounds like Tax 29 is the best value in the Valley. Where can we find out more information?
Stop by one of our local offices or visit us at tax29.com.
What's the real story? How did all of this come to be? Was it all by chance, or did something or someone design everything? Join us as we learn from our host, William Henry, and discover that the story of the Earth and our universe is really his story.
Welcome to Discovering His Story, a production of Youngstown Christian Television. And this is our 25th episode. Celebrate with us. Well, anyway, we're looking at history from a biblical perspective. We're seeing how the Bible, people in the Bible, what's happening in the Bible has an impact upon history, and also some historical background that helps us to understand the Bible better. And so here we are in the period that we call ancient times. And more specifically, in that time period, we're looking at the land of Canaan, the promised land. Last time, we were examining the entrance of Joshua leading the children of Israel into the land of Canaan, and spent a lot of time looking at Jericho. If you missed that episode, go to the archives and see all the archaeological evidence that gives us information about Jericho. The last thing we looked at was the government that was in place for Israel as they're coming into the land. You're probably familiar with the book of Judges, and it's there that we see this government being implemented. It has all three branches of government: the legislative branch, the executive branch, and the judicial branch, and it is implemented as indicated here on this slide. There were judges throughout Israel so that they were available for the people when they had issues. Now, next we want to look at the peoples that were in and around the land at the time that Israel comes to this promised land. Now, before we had looked at the people that lived in the land of Canaan prior to this on another episode, thinking about what kind of people they were and what justified Israel coming in, Yahweh telling them to eliminate all of those that were present. But now we want to look more specifically at the people that were around the land at that particular moment when Israel comes in. And first we're going to be looking at those that were to the east of Canaan. So this is not within Canaan, but to east of the Jordan River, the peoples that were there. The first group that we want to think about are the Moabites. Do you remember who the Moabites were? Well, as indicated on the screen here, they are descendants of Lot. If you remember, when Lot escaped from Sodom, he and his wife and two daughters alone, they were on their way up to the mountain, and Lot's wife looked back, turned into a pillar of salt. So then it was Lot and his two daughters. As they were in a cave in that mountain, his daughters took turns seducing him, and each of them became pregnant, giving birth to these two peoples then that populated the area east of the land of Canaan. The first are the Moabites, and you see the Bible reference there. They worshipped a god called Chemosh, who required them to sacrifice children by burning them in these sacrificial acts. You can see the picture there that indicates how this was done. The god would have a fire in his belly, and it would heat up the metal of his whole figure, particularly the arms that were outstretched, and they would lay a living baby in his arms, and it would be burnt alive in that fashion. Such a disgusting, awful way of worshiping. Also, the worship of Kamash included a fertility cult with prostitution, so they looked at having sex with prostitutes as being a form of worship. The Ammonites, the cousins of the Moabites, were not much better, or probably no better. They worshipped Moloch, and they also sacrificed children by burning. This is another drawing of how that occurred. This was an important rite in the worship of Moloch. And in fact, in excavations at Gezer, an archaeologist found the ruins of a Canaanite temple. Inside, he discovered hundreds of urns containing the bones of children from 4 to 12 years old who had been burned alive. Another horrible practice along this line was called foundation sacrifice. This called for the slaughter of a child upon the construction of a house. Its body would then be stuffed into a wall to assume good luck to the remaining family. What an awful, awful people. The capital of the Ammonites, you can see on the map here in the yellow, was at Rabbath Ammon. The Moabites you can see below them with their capital at Dibon. Now if you look to the left of the map, in red you see the Philistine states. These were where the Philistines lived. The origin of the Philistines we can find back in the book of Genesis. First in the table of nations in Genesis 10:14 as descendants of the Casluhites, and the next in Genesis 21 and 26 as being ruled by King Abimelech of Gerar, with whom Abraham and Isaac came into contact. If you look on here, you'll see the Calushites were a part of the ancient Egyptian people mentioned in the Bible and related literature. According to Genesis 10:14 and 1 Chronicles 1:12, they were descendants of Mizraim, or another name for Egypt, who was a son of Ham. The Philistines, therefore, are very dark-skinned people. They were in the line of Ham and of Egypt. They are said to have come from Caphtor. We find this in several places in the Bible. Later, the Caphtor is known as Crete and Cyprus. Many think that these Carathites were probably Cretans, although some modern scholars identify them with the island of Cyprus. This is due, in fact, partly to the fact that Philistines were known for their ironworking, whereas the island of Crete contains no iron, but is known for the presence and export of copper. Cyprus is more attractive as a dwelling place for the Philistines, for both Cyprus and the Philistines were familiar with metallurgy at a high level, and that pottery from Cyprus strongly resembles pottery from Philistia. Among other reasons, archaeologist by the name of Karageorgis cites Cypriotic myths about Greek heroes who founded cities on the island. Finally, archaeologists Robin and Stieglitz showed that the architecture on the island was comparable with that of Philistia as far as the use of ashlars, that is, large building blocks, were concerned. Another argument in favor of Cyprus is a definite resemblance between Philistine and Cypriotic writings from that period. And so it's my estimation that they probably came at least most directly from Cyprus as they tried to invade Egypt, as we saw before, the invasion of the Sea Peoples coming to be defeated in Egypt and then settling along the coast, the western coast of Canaan. Prior to that, they may have also settled in western Anatolia, or we call it Turkey today. The Iliad in Book 2 mentions the Pelasgians, allies of Troy, who are probably the Philistines. After the fall of Troy, groups of Greek heroes wandered the eastern Mediterranean, with some being described in the Odyssey as fighting in Egypt, where they destroyed Egyptian farmland, killed men, and carried off women and children. At the beginning of the Iliad, in Book 1, there is a story of pestilence which is dealt with in a similar way that we find in 1 Samuel 5 and 6. Also, there's a similar story of Megaran king Nisus, who had a lock of red hair that gave him strength. His deceitful daughter Scylla shaved his lock and betrayed him to King Minos of Crete. Goliath has been compared to Alyattes, who founded the Lydian Empire. The description of Goliath's armor is similar to Greek warriors in the Iliad. The battle of David and Goliath is similar to Hector and Achilles in the Iliad. So for all these reasons, there seems to be an indication that the Philistines may have come originally from Anatolia and then came from there to Cyprus, and from there to the western area of Canaan. Being from Anatolia, the Philistines may have had a connection with the Hittites as well. A historian by the name of Reimschneider has compiled the following facts about the Philistines. He says that Jewish and Christian translations of the Bible from the 2nd to the 5th century AD render Caphtor as Cappadocia, a province within the Hittite Empire. And although we may disagree with him about the location of Caphtor, at least he's seeing a connection between the Philistines and Cappadocia. In 711 BC, Sargon II, who was the emperor of Assyria, used the name Hittites to indicate the inhabitants of the Philistine city of Ashdod. Just like the Philistines in Canaan, thirdly, the Hittites in Anatolia had a monopoly on iron, which was carefully protected. Fourth, the Hittites called their kings judges, as did the Philistines and the tribes of Israel. Fifthly, the Philistine principal god Dagon is also a god of the Hittites. Dagon Zippus and their second god Baal-zebub is paralleled in the Hittite god Zababa of Zipparwa. And then sixthly, the types of pottery we call Philistine are found everywhere along the eastern coast of the Mediterranean. So it can't be used as hard evidence for that, but the other evidence seems to indicate that they were strongly connected with the Hittites, if not being Hittite themselves. Well, the speculation then comes, why did they leave Anatolia to go to Cyprus? Why did they leave Cyprus to come south to Egypt? After speculating about earthquakes and famine, one archaeologist stated this: anyway, the collapse of the Hittite Empire shortly after 1200 BC, the fall of Troy, 1185 BC, and the invasions into Egypt around 1207 and 1175 BC were all part of a major catastrophe that pushed peoples from the north to the south and caused large devastations among the late Bronze cultures. When the mass migrations came to a halt, Greece was left impoverished, while prosperous and highly developed cultures seemed to have moved to the south. The Philistines arrived in the southwest of Canaan in the 12th century BC, and this marked the end of Egypt's domination over the region. By the way, that's about the same time that the Israelites were progressing from the east into the land of Canaan. Having been forced out of Anatolia and or Cyprus, and we can see this referenced in Deuteronomy 2:23, Jeremiah 47:4, and Amos 9:7, they tried to take Egypt, to whom they were distantly related, being from the line of Ham, through his second son Mizraim, as we see in 1 Chronicles 1:12. This slide shows inscriptions in the mortuary temple of Ramesses III, who was the pharaoh who fought against the Sea Peoples. And these people may very well be the Philistines who are invading Egypt, but were beaten back. This next one also shows the defeated Sea People soldiers by Ramses III. They're called the Tejeker, but probably the Philistines. The Sea Peoples invaded the coastline of Palestine, after whom the land is named. In other words, Palestine is the Latin form of Philistine that was named that by the British. And eventually they settled along the coastal plains of Canaan in 12 BC, ending Egyptian domination in the region. So they settled there along the coast, the pinkish area called Philistia. You can see that in relationship to later time of Judah and Israel, but the area they settled was still the same. Here they formed a 5-city league, which consisted of Gaza, Ashdod, Ashkelon, Ekron, and Gath. A lord ruled each city. These newcomers soon became Israel's most dangerous opponent, and by 1100 pushed back Judah's border and surrounded Israel. For a time after 1050 BC, they virtually ruled Palestine, even capturing the Ark of the Covenant, as you remember, in the center of Israel's homeland. Now, contrary to the use of their name, even today, as being people who were crude and uncouth, you know what I hate? I hate when a man holds a door open for me. I've got anger issues, man, for reals. Sometimes I just lose it. Well, the Philistines really weren't any more uncouth than anybody else living at the time, I don't think. At least archaeological findings of the Philistines indicate otherwise. They were literate and were excellent town planners, laying out their towns with straight, parallel streets. Their buildings were built with round hearths, unique in Canaan, and Aegean in its roots. In other words, this comes from the area between Greece, around Greece and Anatolia. Their taste in pottery was excellent. The vessel's shapes and geometric and bird motif decorations displaying characteristic Aegean styling. Microanalysis indicates that they were used for beer, a beverage the Philistines seem to have been particularly fond of. In fact, the Philistines were the boozers of their day, consuming great quantities of barley beer. Many of the handsome mugs that have been found are fitted with a filter, which served to keep back the barley husks floating in the home-brewed ale. Their highest achievement, however, was in their mastery of ironworking, which came from the Hittites, who also lived in the Aegean area. The Philistine menace to Israel was greater at first because it was so insidious. The direct, cruel aggression of the Moabites, Canaanites, Midianites, etc. was missing, to be replaced by infiltration through intermarriage and trade. Their rule over the peoples they dominated does not appear at all onerous at this early stage, and the men of Judah, who like the Danites were affected by these encroachments, seem to have resented the exploits of Samson and to have accepted the Philistine yoke with docility. The main reason for victory in battle was the possession of iron smelting, which they probably learned from the Hittites, the first to discover this method after the Great Flood. Well, let's consider their religion. The Philistines were very religious, worshiping Dagon, the grain god, Ashtaroth, for propagation, and Baal-zebub, the god of habitation. Dagon is an interesting name. The Hebrew noun means grain, which would fit with their you worshiping him in the land of Canaan along that coast for grain purposes. However, the first part of the word dag means fish. And so it may indicate the Philistine being the people of the sea peoples, being associated with fishing more, but then they land in Canaan, they become farmers. And so we have this interesting combination of their god being part fish, part man, and being considered a grain god. This god led his people in warfare, provided for the fertility of the land and populace, protected the territory from human and divine encroachment, and took special care of the royal family. More interestingly, Dagon kept contact with his people by means of prophetic communication. Professional and non-professional prophets would report the will of the deity through those whom the gods seized for such communication. They celebrated their victories in the house of their idols and often carried their gods into battle. In the Bible, we find many different contacts between Israel and the Philistines. In the book of Judges, we have Shamgar and Samson fighting with them. They're eventually driven back to the coast by Samuel in 1 Samuel 7. Jonathan defeated them in 1 Samuel 14. David fought with them in 1 Samuel 17 and 2 Samuel 5. Saul lost to them and was killed in the battle in 1 Samuel 31. And they were totally subjected by the time of Solomon in 1 Kings chapter 4. So those are the Philistines. Remember, they're living along the coast. The next group of people associated with Israel at this time are people called the Aramaeans. Now, if you remember way back, we talked about the Aramaeans. They were a dominant group of people living in that part of the world. They were the traders. They traded with every group of people from Mesopotamia over to Egypt. And as a result, their language, the Aramaic language, became the language of everybody as a second language after the language of their birth. They're often called Syrians because of where they live. You look at the map here, you see the kingdom of Aram, the Aramaeans, and that area is also called Syria. Their capital is Damascus. Lots of references in the Bible to the Aramaeans and to the Syriacs. The Aramaic language becomes the language that is still spoken by Jesus and those living around him at his time. He spoke in Aramaic, which is very similar to Hebrew. The next group of people that we see in the area are the Phoenicians, and we've already talked about them in a previous episode, so we're not going to go into them any further, but you see the Phoenician states are up north of Israel. You see that their main cities are Tyre, Sidon, Byblos. They are seafaring people who conquered the Mediterranean and I think even sailed out into the Atlantic and maybe even around Africa. So they are merchants of the sea. And you can go look for them back on a previous episode to find out more about the Phoenicians. All right, that brings us then to after Israel has been in the land, has conquered as much territory as they were able to, and brings us, excuse me, to the book of Judges and the time of the Judges. The time of the Judges is a time of cycles. There is a repeated cycle in the book of Judges, as you can see by this slide. We have a time when Israel serves God and experiences peace, and then they do evil in the sight of the Lord. The Lord brings war and slavery to them from some outside nation. They cry out to God for salvation, for deliverance. They turn to God and repent. Then God raises up a judge to deliver Israel, followed by a time of peace and Israel serving God. But then once again, Israel does evil, turns away from God, and the cycle is repeated throughout the book of Judges, 7 times, I believe it is. Here's a more simple way of looking at it. The cycle of the Judges moves from sin to servitude, to sorrow, to salvation, and back to sin again. So there is this cycle that continues on throughout the book of Judges. The people that God uses to deliver them from enemies are called judges. And there is a list of them that we find that is in the book of Judges, serving in different places for different periods of time. Unlikely candidates is the point of this slide for people to lead Israel. Here is a list of the judges in the Old Testament. We find Othniel, who is a judge for 40 years, Ehud, 80 years, Shamgar, Deborah, Gideon, you've probably all heard of him, Tola, Yair, Jephthah, Ibzan, Elon, Abdon, Samson, Eli, and then the final judge not mentioned in the book of Judges is Samuel. So these are the judges. This particular map will show us where the judges served. You can see that the time between Joshua's death and the first king is the time of Judges. It was a time of frightful social religious chaos and moral and spiritual declivity. It teems with violent invasions, apostate religion, unchecked lawlessness, and tribal civil war. Anytime I've come across a junior high boy who doesn't seem interested in reading the Bible, I say, read the book of Judges. I think you'll like it. It sort of appeals to the males in our audience. Here's how it goes. You can see the direction of the judges, the locations of them. First it begins with Othniel, and to Ehud, Deborah. Go further north, all the way north to Shamgar, over to Barak, Gideon, Tola, Yair, down to Jephthah. So you can see that they're scattered geographically as we go through the chronology, and then to Ibzan, and then back up north to Elon. And then back down around to Abdon, over to Samson, the most famous of all, probably. Well, I thought I'd run through some of the judges just to review some of who they were. Ehud is one of my favorites. He is the left-handed Benjamite who kills the King Eglon through some trickery. If you're not familiar with that, go look that up in the book of Judges. It's exciting. He sticks the knife in. This is what appealed to me as a junior high boy. He sticks the knife in so far that the fat of the king covered the handle. Then we have Deborah, the female judge, and how she takes leadership in Israel. Followed by Gideon, the very famous story of Gideon, and Gideon thinking he didn't have enough soldiers, and God says, no, you got too many. Let's cut it down some more. And so he does so. Well, that's all the time we have for today. Next time we'll pick up with some more of the judges and then move into the period of time where Israel gets a king. Next time on Discovering His Story.
What's the real story? How did all of this come to be? Was it all by chance, or did something or someone design everything? Join us as we learn from our host, William Henry, and discover that the story of the earth and our universe is really his story.